Yo, what is up, fight nerds and dirty gamblers? I am Erik, and this is Erik Bets Fights. We're back, folks. It's already Friday. I'm super late getting this out. If you follow me on Twitter, you already know I've been sick. If you're not familiar with something called the norovirus, look that up. It's nasty, nasty stuff. My stepson got it on, Friday night, I think, and then it hit my wife and I on Sunday night. It's absolutely awful. I won't get into details, of course, but it's one of those sitting on the toilet puking into the garbage can kind of thing. So yeah, it was rough. It ended up taking our whole household out. That was Sunday night. I think we got it, and I'm still not feeling 100%. I'm pretty close now, but I've basically been doing a whole lot of sleeping and not much of anything else all week. So I did want to still get this video out. I did still want to give you my thoughts. Excuse me, on the card. I did do the tape study, but full disclosure, I didn't get as deep into it as I would have liked because I just didn't have the time that I normally have. So basically my schedule normally, I don't work Mondays. So basically we watch fights on Saturday, and then Sunday I'm right into tape study mode again. So Sunday and then all day Monday, I get my tape study done, and then I'm like typing up my notes and working on that stuff on Tuesday, and then I try to get the video out either Tuesday or Wednesday. So this week I was able to get like half the tape study done on Sunday, but then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I just wasn't feeling good, and so I finished like maybe half the card doing only the most recent fight for each fighter. So I wasn't able to dig back further than that for a lot of the fights. So some of them I don't have real strong reads. I don't have real deep thoughts for you. Or, I don't get super deep into the technical analysis a lot of the time anyway, largely because I lack the technical know-how to do so. So I just give you what I can. Anyway, let's start by recapping how the last event went, because we had one of the biggest winning events we've had so far. We picked up 8.33 units on the Santos versus Ankalaev event. I'm just going to go through these bets real quickly. We had our biggest straight bet was on Alex Pereira at minus 170. He did come through for us. It was a very close fight. It wasn't a blowout by any means. So, it was a little bit of a nail biter for having three units on it. I was pretty confident on that one. He did come through for us, but close fight. Silva looked good. Next up, we had 1 unit on AJ Fletcher as a pretty big underdog at plus 210. I would make that bet every day. I don't feel bad about that bet. I thought Fletcher looked really good. He made some mistakes. He gassed out later in the fight, but he looked really good. And I think Semmelsberger said himself in his post-fight interview, he said, like, that kid's good. He's going to have a career in the UFC. I think Semmelsberger's probably right about that. Next up, we did have a unit on JJ Aldrich at plus 115 against Jillian Robertson. She came through for us. And we had a unit on Trevin Jones at plus 125 against Javid Basharat. I don't know if that was a great bet, but I kind of made that. I thought that based on the tape, I liked Javid. I ended up making a bet on Trevin mostly based on kind of the narrative of like he's the guy with the higher level experience and that kind of thing. So I decided to take a shot on him at that plus money, and he didn't come through for us there, but that's all right. Okay, on to the props and parlays. We put 2 units on Song Yadong inside the distance at minus 110. Obviously, every time you win a bet, you say, I wish I would have put more on that. But this is definitely a situation where, looking back, I really felt like Song inside the distance was the most likely outcome for this fight. And I think Song was like a minus 240 favorite or something. And this was one of those situations where you were getting a fighter's best win condition at like a much, much better price than the fighter's money line. And I felt that win condition was so likely that it really should have been lined closer to the money line. So this is one of those spots where I really probably should have hit it harder, but we did hit it for 2 units. So pretty happy with that. Next up, we had a parlay of Ankalaev and Yusuf, which came out to minus 143. I was pretty confident on that one, so I put 3 units on that. Both of those fights ended up being a little bit sweatier than we would have liked. Ankalaev, he was pretty well in control of the fight, but he didn't like necessarily dominate Santos the way people thought he might have. And Yusuf, honestly, after the tape study, I was actually thinking that was too big of a price on Yusuf. And I thought that Bruce Leroy was pretty live there. But then after kind of hearing others' thoughts and listening to some other podcasts and stuff, I ended up feeling like Yusuf was okay to put in there at minus 240. But yeah, looking back on it, like, it was a closer fight than that price would suggest. And Yeah, I mean, I ended up coming away from that fight being less impressed with Yusuf and more impressed with Caceres, and I would think that was the case for most people watching. But and then next up we had the first time, or at least the first time in quite a while, that I felt confident actually tracking one of these big parlays. I have more of those on the card for tomorrow, but yeah, we had a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 legger. We put in Miranda Maverick, Drew Dober, Alex Pereira, Sodiq Yusuf, Yadong Song, and Magomed Ankalaev. We put them all together for plus 672. We put half a unit on that. So we picked up 3.36 units there. So yeah, like I usually shy away from tracking big parlays like that. But when I feel pretty good about it, I might start kind of putting those on there once in a while. So that one did hit for us. So that was nice. Next up, we did put 1 unit on Aldrich versus Robertson to go over 2.5 rounds at minus 135. That was one of those spots where, I mean, for a women's MMA fight, the over 2.5 being only minus 135. I mean, you usually see those, minus 200 to minus 300, so that was that was a spot I probably should have hit a little harder too, but I was a little bit worried about the possibility of a finish there, so I didn't go too wild on it. But and then our sprinkles at the bottom here. We sprinkled on Bruno Silva by submission at plus 1,600 for 0.2 units. And then I accidentally sprinkled Robertson by submission twice, once at plus 650 and once at plus 900. That's just because of my dumb working memory that I sometimes talk to you guys about. And I ended up tracking them both on here just because I did, because I made both bets, so I put them on here. But I went and made a bet in the kind of later in the day on Robertson by submission at plus 900, and then I looked at my other book and realized I had already made a bet on that at plus 650, which wasn't that great of a number, but it did. Neither of them hit anyway, so lost 0.4 units there. But yeah, overall we had put out 13.1 units, and we picked up 8.33 for a 64% return on our investment. So really happy with that event. Really happy with how things are going in general. With our tracking on betmma.tips, we're sitting at 62.53 units of profit at 27% ROI. And I don't know the exact number, but last I checked, we were ranked at like 150 on the leaderboard or so, which isn't great, but you got to think of it this way. Like, okay, if you look at betmma.tips, up in the upper right, it says total MMA handicappers, 4,083. So there's 4,083 people that track themselves on here. Of those 4,083, 1,617 are profitable. And we're currently sitting at 150 out of those 1,617. So if you do the math on that, not that like every MMA handicapper in the world is tracking themselves on here, but I would say most of them probably are. So if you do the math on like 150 or so out of a little over 4,000, we could say that we are currently in the top like 3 to 4% of MMA handicappers on the planet potentially. So considering that we're new to this game, I'm saying we, like the royal we, but some of you all are in this with me, I hope. But anyway, but yeah, we're sitting in a pretty good spot. I'm feeling really good. If we look at the graph, we've had a couple small dips down, but it's basically been going up and up. I'm expecting a regression anytime now. Maybe tomorrow. Hopefully not. But anyway, thanks for hanging out for that little update there, that little recap. Let's go ahead and jump into breaking down some bets for tomorrow's card. Obviously, it's UFC London, the Tom Aspinall versus Alexander Volkov card. My brain is still a little foggy from that illness, so I'm even struggling coming up with names here. But all right, we'll start at the bottom of the card. Muhammad Mokaev versus Cody Durden. This is a fight that I don't have a super strong read on. I did watch a little bit of tape on Mokaev, but I don't know. Mokaev is kind of an interesting situation. He's only 21 years old. He has won 28 MMA fights. Only 5 of those are at the pro level. So if you look at his pro record, you're going to see 5-0. But if you look at his amateur record, you're going to see 23-0. So obviously, at the amateur level, he probably wasn't fighting very good competition. But even so, a 21-year-old kid who is 28-0, he has stepped into the cage 28 times and won every time at 21 years old. I think that's pretty freaking impressive. He made his amateur debut when he was like 15. I'm not sure. I didn't do the math on it, but he would have been about 15 or 16 when he made his amateur debut. So even though there isn't really like even the most recent fight I was able to find of his was even like, I think it was his first pro fight. And then there was some of his amateur fights. I didn't bother watching those, but so even though the tape that we have on him maybe isn't the greatest, I think it's important that we keep in mind what those numbers mean. We've got a 21-year-old kid who has already stepped into the cage 28 times and, starting at age 15, let's say. So like it's reasonable to assume that this kid has been living and breathing and dreaming and shitting MMA only for the last 6 or 7 years of his life or whatever. I mean, you don't get there by accident. You don't make your amateur debut at 15 and fight 28 times over the next 6 years, winning every time. I mean, this kid obviously is taking the game very seriously. He's obviously working very hard. Does that mean he's necessarily going to win his UFC debut? Of course not. But these are important things to take into account, I think. I mean, this kid has a pretty big prospect tag on him, and I think that's reasonable. I think that's reasonable to put that tag on him, even without seeing any tape at all. Just looking at the numbers, it's reasonable to consider this kid a pretty big prospect, I think. He's making his UFC debut against Cody Durden, who is, a solid but not necessarily spectacular fighter. I mean, he's mostly known as a wrestler. He's got the USA Wrestling tattoo on the back of his shoulder blade there. I've never done the math and figured it out, but that's got to be the most common tattoo that we've seen on UFC fighters, right? I mean, how many UFC fighters can you think of right off the top of your head that have that USA? The guy suplexing the other guy or whatever it is inside the outline of the United States. Anyway, Cody Durden has that as well. So he's mostly known as a wrestler, and he is a solid wrestler, but he's a pretty solid striker too. He's got some boxing bouts and some kickboxing bouts on his record as well. The guy can crack. He does tend to slow down a little bit in his fights. So yeah, like as far as betting on this fight, I think you can use Mokaev as a parlay piece. Sorry, I'm supposed to pull up the odds at the beginning of these, and I always forget to do it. Mokaev is minus 370. Durden is plus 330. If you feel pretty confident in Mokaev, obviously that's a pretty crazy number, minus 370. I don't know if you want to touch that or not, but it's potentially parlayable. I do think this is probably a spot where the UFC wants Mokaev to get a win. Doesn't mean that always works for them, but I think they know what they're doing here. I think they wanted to give him, a solid but beatable opponent, which is, I think, what Cody Durden represents in this spot. But yeah, I think you could potentially look to parlay Mokaev here. But I think you could potentially look to put a little something on Durden too. I know that the number has gotten to a point where some people are looking to bet the underdogs on some of these fights, especially with this being in London. We have seen the numbers get super crazy on some of the British and UK fighters. So, we're going to see a lot of parlays, I think, and from myself included. But the numbers have gotten so crazy, and they're probably going to get even crazier tomorrow when the UK audience is getting in and doing even more betting. I think we're going to see some of these underdogs get to a spot where they might be kind of tempting, and Cody Durden could be one of them. So yeah, Cody Durden's money line, like plus 340 or whatever. You can also get Cody Durden by decision at plus 550. I do think Mokaev's probably going to win here, but I think those numbers are something that are, potentially a little bit tempting and could get even more tempting tomorrow. So something to think about. Next fight is Elise Reed versus Corey McKenna. I haven't done any tape on this fight at all. I'm still going to do some tape on this fight tonight because I have the DFS by the numbers best bets show tomorrow morning. So I got to make sure I got all my research ready for that. So haven't done any tape on that yet. So I'm not going to talk about that fight at all. So we're just going to skip right on to Jack Shore versus Timur Valiev. This is a pretty solid fight. I think if it stays on the feet, I do favor Valiev. I think Valiev is he's the better athlete. I think he's quicker. He's more athletic. He's more dynamic. He's that guy who's going to be bouncing in and out. He's going to have a lot of movement. He's going to be coming in and out of range. He also he does throw more as well. Let's see. I had those numbers typed up here somewhere, but I can't. Valiev. Sorry, I need to figure out a way to actually set up my the numbers that I'm going to throw at you to actually set them up in a way where I can find them easily. I've just got all my crap typed out here. Anyway, I don't recall the exact numbers, but Valiev throws and lands quite a few more significant strikes per minute than does Shore. Shore is one of those guys that he stays pretty measured and pretty methodical, which is good. In a lot of fights that can be a really good thing, but Valiev is the kind of opponent against which that could be a problem, because Valiev is going to be, getting a little wilder, being a little more busy, being a little more dynamic and that kind of thing. That said, Jack Shore has really excellent reactive takedowns. So I think if the fight stays on the feet, I do favor Valiev to win just based on having more output likely here. However, if we do see Jack Shore find some success with his wrestling, Shore does land 4.47 takedowns per 15 minutes. And Valiev has 50% takedown defense in the UFC so far, but that's only on 2 attempts. He's only had 2 takedowns attempted against him. He stopped one of them. So, I would say that doesn't really tell us much about his takedown defense. So if we do see Jack Shore shoot takedowns here, and he also has 43% control time against his opponents on the ground. So if it stays on the feet, I favor Valiev. If Shore is able to find those takedowns and find control time, I think he could win a decision here. And one thing that I thought was kind of interesting, so the odds on this fight, it's pretty close to a coin flip. Jack Shore is plus 102, Timur Valiev minus 112. So yeah, pretty close to a 50-50 kind of fight. However, if you look at their by decision props, Timur Valiev by decision is plus 130. Jack Shore by decision is plus 200. And I'm guessing that's because Shore has tended to find submissions and that sort of thing. But I do lean toward thinking this fight probably goes to decision. And if you think there's a good chance that Shore can get those takedowns and that control time, Jack Shore by decision at plus 200 doesn't seem like too bad of a bet. I mean, considering you've got a fight that's pretty much a coin flip, and you're getting what I feel is one of those fighters, probably his best path to victory at plus 200 when his money line is a coin flip. I think that's not too bad of a bet. I'm not betting anything on this one at the moment, but if I was going to, I'd potentially go with that Jack Shore by decision. Next up, we've got Nikita Krylov versus Paul Craig. This is a great fight. Both these guys are a lot of fun. I love Paul Craig. He's somebody that I've come to really enjoy watching, and I've also come to really enjoy him on the mic, and I just kind of like him as a guy. I just think he seems pretty cool. Overall, I do kind of feel like this is Krylov's fight to lose. I feel like Krylov is the more well-rounded mixed martial artist overall. I feel like he's better on the feet. I feel like he's the better minute winner. So basically, I feel like if Nikita Krylov completely minds his P's and Q's here, if he comes in here and keeps that fight IQ intact and is making the right decisions and not putting himself in danger, I think he can win a comfortable decision here. That said, anytime you go to the ground with Paul Craig, you're in trouble. I mean, we've seen that time and time again. There are so many fighters who are known as dangerous jiu-jitsu players who frankly just don't end up finding submissions that often. We think of them as these venomous grapplers, and they don't even end up submitting people all that often. And if they do, they have to work for it for a long time and be on the ground for a long time working for it. Paul Craig is not that guy. Paul Craig is literally the guy that if you go to the ground with him and he gets into a position that he wants to be in for even a few seconds, you can be in big trouble. And that can be a really tough thing to deal with. And Nikita Krylov isn't always a guy who minds his P's and Q's either. He's a guy who can get a little wild in there and kind of just look to get loose and have a little fun. He's not always necessarily keeping it as tight as he can and making the best decisions, I don't think. So if it stays on the feet, Krylov throws 7.7 significant strikes per minute and lands 4.3. Paul Craig throws only 5.0 and lands 2.5. So Krylov is the much busier fighter, the better striker. So I think it's kind of largely the same breakdown as the Valiev versus Shore. If Krylov makes the right decisions to keep the fight on the feet and he's able to stop Paul Craig from getting it to the ground. And, Paul Craig will shoot takedowns. Paul Craig will clinch up with you and try to pull guard. Paul Craig doesn't care if he ends up on the bottom, if he ends up on top. He doesn't care how he gets it to the ground. So he can be a scary fighter to go up against for that reason. And Krylov is good on the ground too. So that's another thing that's kind of concerning is Krylov going to go in here with the idea that he needs to do everything in his power to keep this on the feet, or is he going to think, well, I'm a good grappler too. I can go to the ground with this guy. I don't know. It's hard to say. But all things considered, I think the line is about right here. We're looking at Krylov is about minus 184, Paul Craig plus 172. I think that's about right. I think Krylov being, a moderate favorite, considering that he's just got the more paths to victory, and that for the most part, I think unless Paul Craig can get the fight exactly where he wants it and get exactly the situation that he wants and needs, I don't really see him winning this fight. That said, if you've watched my videos for a while, I love these sprinkles on a round 3 submission. And I think if there was ever a fighter on the roster where you got to sprinkle that round 3 submission, it's Paul Craig. It's only at plus 1,300 on Bet Online, which is the book that I have that has props. I know Bet Online's props are not as juicy as they are on some books a lot of the time, so I don't know if it's maybe lined a little better on some other books. And not, mine plus 1,300 isn't terrible. You'll usually get it a lot juicier than that, but again, the bookies understand that Paul Craig is a guy who's very live for a round 3 submission, so you can't be making it too juicy, right? All right, moving on to Shamil Abdurakhimov versus Sergey Pavlovich. I think this is another fight that's like pretty straightforward to break down. Pavlovich has been out for quite a while. He had some injuries and he also had some visa issues, I think. But, last we saw him, which was like 2.5 years ago or something like that. I mean, he's a big, powerful, scary guy who comes out and finds the early finish. I mean, that's really the story of Pavlovich so far. The nice thing is, he does have a fight. If you go back to his pre-UFC tape, he does have a fight that he won by decision. So he has, even though he is that kind of guy, usually when we see a big athletic heavyweight like that who comes out and gets those first round finishes, the concern becomes, well, what if he doesn't get that first round finish? Is he able to put together a performance beyond that? And we did see him win a decision against a fairly solid competitor. I can't remember the guy's name. I posted a picture of him on Twitter because he has a really small head. But anyway, his name is Mokaev something. But anyway, so I see Pavlovich as very live to come out here and do that same thing that he's done, to come out here and overwhelm Shamil Abdurakhimov early and find that round 1 knockout. Abdurakhimov, he's 40 years old. He's at least 40 years old. He might even be one of those guys who's not been completely straightforward about his age. But he's a great example of one of those heavyweights he's solid, he's tough, but he doesn't exactly blow you away. He's not super impressive anywhere. He's just kind of solid and reasonably well-rounded. But I think that there's a good chance that we do see Pavlovich potentially find that early finish here. And even if he doesn't, I think that he can still be effective if the fight is dragged on. So I do like Sergey Pavlovich as a parlay piece here. Pavlovich is at minus 290 to Abdurakhimov's plus 280 here. I honestly think, things can get greasy at heavyweight when people are throwing around that kind of power, but considering some of the other big favorites that we have on the card, I'm actually a little bit surprised that Pavlovich his line isn't wider than minus 290. I think that's actually pretty playable as a parlay piece. And probably the reason that it's not wider is because he's not a UK fighter. If he was, we'd be seeing that UK tax there, I think. Oh, just 1 second. All right. Next up, we've got Mike Grundy versus McCann Amirkhani. This is a fight that I kind of had a hard time getting a read on as well. Grundy is one of those guys who's he's a solid wrestler. He's got power in his hands, but his boxing is pretty fundamental. He can box, but it's nothing fantastic. He does seem to struggle to put it all together into like a complete game. It seems like, he's a wrestler, he's a boxer, but he's not a great wrestle boxer, if you know what I mean. He has trouble with the aspect of the game that, if you've ever read GSP's book, the aspect that GSP calls shoot box, where you're actually taking the different skills and putting them all together. I think that Grundy is in his mind, he's like, okay, right now I am boxing. Okay, now I am wrestling. He doesn't do a great job of being like, I am mixed martial arting, But anyway, I think McCann Amirkhani probably has the better overall MMA game, but McCann, he's on a several fight losing streak, and he does tend to fade as the fight goes on. Grundy fades a little bit too, but I think McCann drops off a bit more, and so I lean toward thinking that Grundy's going to have Grundy's. I think he's going to have the more horsepower. I think he's the stronger, more powerful fighter. So I think he's likely going to be able to control the wrestling. He and potentially get the better of the boxing as well. And I think we might see McCann start to fade later in the fight. And so I lean toward either Grundy by decision or Grundy even potentially finding a submission or a ground and pound stoppage late in the fight, probably in round 3. As far as odds here, we've got Grundy at minus 184 Makwan Amirkhani at plus 165, which again, I think that's about right. Grundy being, you know, a moderate sized favorite like that, I think is probably about where it should be lined. My wife just walked by doing some dumb dance trying to get my attention. Anyway, where the heck was I? That's probably about all I have to say about that one. Anyway, I'm not betting that fight. I'm staying away from it. I might have put Grundy in a parlay. I can't remember for sure. Well, I'm going to go over all the bets that I have for this card when we get to the end of breaking everything down here. But this is a parlay heavy card for me. The only straight bet that I have right now is on Tom Aspinall, and I'm actually thinking about hedging out of that one. We'll talk about that when we get there. But next up, Jai Herbert versus Ilia Topuria. And look at me, guys. I'm going to pull up the odds and tell you the odds before we break down the fight for once. Ilia Topuria is a huge favorite at minus 550. Jai Herbert is at plus 450. Very, very wide odds, of course, but I think for good reason. I think this is a pretty binary fight to break down. Jai Herbert is massive. He's a huge guy. He's got a lot of power in his hands, but that's kind of about all he's got, you know? I mean, is Jai Herbert live to find a knockout here in round one? Sure, I guess so, but it's not likely, you know? I mean, Ilia Topuria is the much smaller fighter here. Ilia Topuria is a good striker too. I mean, Ilia Topuria is very well-rounded. He's a good wrestler. He's got great submissions. He's a good striker. But I think we can count on him to be smart here and realize, like, okay, even though he's a solid striker, he doesn't want to come out here and strike against a guy who's much bigger than him, very powerful, and whose only path to victory is to find a knockout, essentially. So, you know, I think we can rely on Topuria to come out here and look to go to his wrestling early and often. Jai Herbert has only 30% takedown defense, so Topuria probably shouldn't have much trouble getting him down. I've seen a lot of people saying that they're on Ilia Topuria by sub in round one, which I think is a reasonable bet. The only thing that kind of like steers me away from that is that Herbert did last until the second round, actually till the very end of the second round against Renato Moicano, who's a solid grappler as well. But yeah, obviously Topuria is such a prohibitive favorite that even the Ilia Topuria by sub prop is only at plus 105. So, I mean, you don't really get any meat on that bone. Ilia Topuria by sub in round one is at plus 250. And Ilia Topuria by sub in round two is at plus 600. I like that round two at plus 600. I think this is one of those spots where, you know, to get him by sub to cover all three rounds, you only get plus 105. I think it's very likely that Ilia Topuria finds the sub either in round one or in round two. I don't think the fight probably goes to round three. So I don't mind the idea of sprinkling the sub in round one at plus 250 and sprinkling the sub in round two at plus 600 and hoping one of those hits. I can't remember if I've sprinkled those yet or not on my official bets, but that's one thing that I am potentially looking at doing. Next up, we've got Molly McCann versus Luana Carolina. I did a little bit of tape study on this fight just right before the video here. I don't have a super strong read here necessarily, but one thing that I do want to say, one thing that kept like kind of striking me about this fight is, obviously we're in London here. It's been, 3 years or whatever since, for several years now, not 3 years, but like 2 years or whatever. The UFC has been holding most of their events in the Apex facility, and eventually they started doing shows in bigger arenas again. But it's been at least 3 years or something since they've been to London, and we know that the UK crowd is they go absolutely insane. They love MMA. They love their hometown fighters. They are a very vocal and crazy crowd, and I think we're going to see UK fighters. So there's several different things that we need to consider as far as how crazy that crowd is. UK fighters are going to be energized and backed up by that crowd. If they find themselves in difficult positions and the whole crowd is screaming for them, that's something that's potentially going to give them hope and give them energy and give them the desire to work out of those positions. There's also the possibility that's going to affect the judges, and that's, it could be just straight up, home cooking, as they say, where the judge is going to just lean toward the British fighters because they're the British fighters. But I also think it's partially that while the judge is watching the fight, so in this fight, we'll use Luana Carolina versus Molly McCann as the example here. Every time Luana Carolina can land a huge punch that snaps Molly McCann's head back, and the crowd is not going to react to that. Molly McCann can lunge forward and land a couple little pitter-patter shots, and the crowd is going to explode. And so those things are getting into the judges' heads. I mean, the judges are only human. Those things are, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, every time the crowd is exploding like that, that's getting in the judges' heads. So even if it's not, actual potential or actual like intentional home cooking where the judge is picking the British fighter, I think all of that does make a difference in the judging in the end. And I really think, like, out of all the fighters on this card, Molly McCann is the one that strikes me as someone who is going to be very, very energized and amped up by having that hometown crowd behind her. I mean, she's a fighter who's very kind of energetic and aggressive anyway, and I think we are going to see her come out ready to rock with that UFC London crowd behind her, So that's just something, every time I think about this fight, I just keep thinking like, man, unless Luana Carolina is able to find a finish here, I just don't see how she's going to win. I think the fight is likely to go to decision. If it does go to decision, unless Luana Carolina was able to get some 10-8 rounds or absolutely blow her out of the water, I just think the decision is going to end up going Molly McCann's way for all of the reasons that I kind of just discussed. But so like, yeah, if the fight is at all close, I just think Molly McCann's going to get it. However, as for a little bit of technical analysis here, I watched the Luana Carolina versus Lupi Godinez fight, and Luana Carolina has 88% takedown defense, which is very impressive. But one thing I think we need to consider there is, so using the Lupi Godinez fight as an example, Lupi kept coming in and clinching up with Carolina and looking for clinch takedowns, like looking for waist lock takedowns, looking for trip takedowns, that kind of thing. More like judo type takedowns, and that doesn't work real well against Carolina. For one thing, she's very tall, and for another thing, she's very good in the clinch. She has excellent knees. She has good balance in the clinch. She knows how to work in that range. And so I don't think it would be wise for Molly McCann to try to clinch up with Carolina and look for takedowns that way. However, as soon as we saw Lupi Godinez actually change levels and shoot in on a takedown on the legs rather than trying to do working on an upper body clinch takedown, we saw her find success there. And that is something that we see Molly McCann do. So I do think that Molly McCann can be successful with her wrestling here if she's actually shooting takedowns from distance, or even if she's pushing Carolina against the cage and then changing levels, however she chooses to do it. But I think that, trying to clinch up with her and find those upper body or trip takedowns is not going to be, I don't think she's going to have success with that. So I do think we will see Molly McCann be the busier and more aggressive fighter here. We're going to see the crowd behind her. We're hopefully going to see her change levels and shoot for takedowns low on the legs. I do favor Molly McCann to win here, probably by decision. The odds are pretty close on this one. Carolina's a small underdog at plus 124. McCann's a small favorite at minus 130. Last I looked, Molly McCann is a small favorite at minus 130, and last I looked, you could get her by decision at like plus 105. So considering that she's the hometown fighter and all of the things that are working in her favor here, I think getting a tiny bit of plus money on her by decision isn't a bad way to look if you were going to bet this fight. I have so far stayed away from it, and probably will continue to. Next fight up, Gunnar Nelson versus Takashi Sato. What do we got for odds here? We've got Gunnar Nelson at minus 460, even up as high as minus 500, minus 600 in spots. Crazy. Takashi Sato at plus 460. Another one that's pretty binary to break down, I think. On paper, this is a pretty easy fight for for Gunnar Nelson. I don't think there's any reason to believe that Nelson shouldn't be able to find a takedown and find a submission. He is one of those venomous grapplers who can get people out of there, but he also has that kind of elusive, dynamic karate style on the feet that I like to see. He's very like sideways with his stance and jumping around it. I wouldn't say he's a great striker, but he certainly can hold his own on the feet, and because he's so kind of elusive and dynamic with that style that he can be hard to catch too. So, Takashi Sato's best bet here is probably to catch Gunnar Nelson early and knock him out. But Nelson has good movement that I think he'll be able to keep that from happening. I think he'll be able to hold his own on the feet until the takedown presents itself or until he finds that opportunity. And okay, here's some numbers for you here. Nelson has 8 UFC wins. 3 of them have come by submission in round 1, and 4 of them have come by submission in round 2. So of his 8 UFC wins, 1 was a decision, 7 are submissions. Again, 3 in round 1, 4 in round 2. 3 of Sato's 4 losses are by sub, and none of them are in round 1. Did that all make sense? So that's why, if I were to recommend a bet here, I would go with Gunnar Nelson by submission in round 2 at plus 425. Because a full half of Gunnar Nelson's UFC wins have come by submission in round 2. And again, 3 of Sato's 4 losses are by sub, and none of them have been in round 1. They've all been in either round 2 or round 3, or I think he had one in round 4 in a longer fight as well. So I like Gunnar Nelson by submission in round 2 at plus 425. Just a few fights left to go, folks. Paddy Pimblett versus Rodrigo Vargas. I mean, this is a pretty clear setup fight for Paddy Pimblett. I think, and like I said before, that has backfired on the UFC before. It doesn't always work, but it's pretty clear who they want to win here. And the numbers are wild on this one because people freaking love Paddy Pimblett. Pimblett is minus 550, up as high as like minus 650 in spots. Rodrigo Vargas is plus 450. Like I said, the only way I can really see this backfiring on the UFC is if Paddy Pimblett gets too wild looking for the finish and gasses himself out, because he is accustomed to finishing fighters pretty early, and he's a guy too who's probably going to be really amped up by fighting in front of this just crazy voracious London crowd. And that's the only concern I have, is that he's going to be so amped up by that crowd and so ready to give them a show that he's going to come out and look for that round 1 finish and gas himself out. That's a possibility. So this might be a spot that you look at for live betting, because if something like that does happen, if Pimblett has a huge round 1 and then we see him start to slow down, we're going to get potentially get a fantastic – well, we can already get a great number on Vargas, but get an even better number on Vargas moving later into the fight if we see Paddy have a great first round and then start to slow down. But I think Paddy's probably going to want to crack on the feet a little bit, give that hometown crowd a show, but I think the takedown and the submission is there for him when he wants it. If he is able to get Vargas down, I think he should be able to pretty much take care of business there. So that's kind of how I see this fight going. Vargas's takedown defense is only 25%. Vargas is 36 years old. He's small for the division. I mean, there's, you can see all the reasons that the UFC chose him as kind of a setup opponent here. So, Paddy's number obviously at minus 550 is kind of crazy. I did parlay him earlier when he was at like minus 400. I don't know if you'd still want to parlay him now. Maybe. I don't know. It depends on if you're like me. Ideally, if you're going to play a money line, you want there to be perceived value on that money line. Ideally, you want to see perceived value on a money line if you're going to parlay that as well, but I don't always do it that way. If I'm going to straight play something, I want to make sure there's value on that money line, but sometimes when I'm getting crazy with parlays, I just throw them in there. I don't even really care that much. So yeah, I would maybe still parlay Paddy Pimblett at minus 550, but like I said, what I really like here, and maybe you even look at Paddy Pimblett in round 1. Paddy Pimblett by sub in round 1, Paddy Pimblett by KO in round 1. I didn't even look at those numbers, but they're probably not great, honestly, because that is a very likely path to victory here. But like I said, I think keeping an eye on the fight and keeping an eye on the live line, if Paddy's not able to find that early finish, could be an interesting way to play this one. Next up, we've got Arnold Allen versus Dan Hooker. This is a very, very close fight. Allen currently favored a tiny bit at minus 109. Comeback on Hooker plus 102. Pretty coin flippy there, folks. And for good reason, I think. There are definitely some question marks that keep me away from this fight. Like if I knew that both of these fighters were coming in here at their best and were going to give their best performances, I would feel comfortable betting Daniel Hooker here. The only reason I don't is because Hooker is making that drop to 145, which he did earlier in his career, but he's getting older now. It's been a while since he's made that drop. I'm not sure how long it's been since he's done it, but I know it's been a while, and that gets harder and harder to do as you get older. I didn't actually see the weigh-ins. I did see a photo, but I haven't actually watched the weigh-in video, so I don't entirely know how he looked on the scales. I didn't see anything that seemed concerning to me, but I don't know for sure. So, if Arnold Allen does look to push the wrestling here, and if Hooker does have some issues with the weight cut and he gets tired out, yeah, I think we could see Arnold Allen take over and win a decision here. But if Allen is not able to get the takedowns, I think it's a very clear Hooker victory. Dan Hooker is the bigger guy. He's the better striker. He's very, very busy with his output. So that's why, I think it's not really that difficult of a fight to pick if we didn't have the question marks involving, the home cooking and the weight cut. So I have stayed away from this one for now, but I don't know. I might watch the weigh-in video and see what some other people are thinking, and I might potentially put a bet on Dan Hooker here, but currently nothing from me. Oh, that brings us to the last fight already, folks. Tom Aspinall versus Alexander Volkov. Like I said, I did bet Aspinall's money line when it wasn't at open, I don't think, but when I first saw it, Aspinall and Volkov were both at -110. Without doing any tape study or research at all, I jumped on Aspinall at that -110. I put 2 units on that because I was like, I'm getting the young, hot up-and-comer who's been finishing everybody, who's super athletic and super powerful, and I'm getting him against the guy out toward the back end of his career potentially, who's the slower guy, who's maybe fading a little bit, and I'm getting coin flip odds here on the younger guy. So I jumped on that. And then after doing the tape study, and after not even the tape study so much as more so based on just hearing what other cappers had to say, I'm kind of thinking about hedging out of that bet simply because, I was sitting here thinking like, yeah, Aspinall's going to come out and do what he's done every time. He's going to find that early finish, but man, Volkov is not an easy guy to finish. Volkov, if I'm not mistaken, Volkov has been finished twice ever. I think he was finished in the UFC by Curtis Blades, and he was finished in Bellator by Vitaly Minakov. I think those are the only times he's been finished. And that's in, so Curtis Blades, that one was sort of recently, but the Minakov one was like 20 fights ago. So yeah, 2 times in the last 20 fights or whatever. So Volkov is a guy that's tough to finish. He's a guy that we know can go 5 rounds because we've seen him do it. He's not very quick. He's not very athletic. He's not super powerful. He's a guy who can kind of be sort of slow and plodding, but in a fight like this, that might be all he needs to win. We don't know. Aspinall has 13 professional fights, and in those 13 professional fights, if I'm not mistaken, he's only gone to past the first round 3 times. I think he's gone past the first round 3 times, and he's never gone past the second round, I believe. The only time he went past the first round in the UFC was against Arlovsky, and he ended up finding that rear naked choke early in round 2. But we did see him start to look a little bit tired there already in round 2. And the other 2 times that he's gone past round 1, which were earlier in his career against lower level competition, he lost those fights. So 2 out of the 3 times he's gone past round 1, he has lost, which is a little bit concerning. So do we know what his cardio looks like as he goes late into the fight? No. But we may have reason to believe that it doesn't look that great, and we know that Volkov can do that. We know that Volkov can fight all 25 minutes. So that's why I'm thinking about hedging out here is like, if Aspinall can't find that finish in round 1 or in round 2, what happens from there, I mean, like if you envision all the different ways that this fight can potentially play out, Alexander Volkov winning by decision makes perfect sense to me. Does Tom Aspinall winning by decision make sense? No, I just can't. I can't see that happening. If I'm picking Tom Aspinall to win, I'm like, okay, well, he's either going to find the knockout in round 1 or 2. And then I realized, like, okay, well, I made that bet on him without really thinking all of this through, because if he doesn't find that knockout in round 1 or 2, then I definitely lean Alexander Volkov to win. So I see why this line is as close as it is. So what I'm likely going to do, because I think Aspinall, did I look at those odds already? Aspinall is at minus 116. Volkov at plus 110. Aspinall is also up as high as like minus 130 in spots. And what's the best? Oh yeah, best on Volkov is plus 110. Anyway, if I see, tomorrow, I think when the London market is potentially betting these fights more, I think we're going to see more money come in on Aspinall. I think we're going to see those numbers move a little bit. I am potentially going to end up hedging out on this, especially if Volkov's number does get a little bit better. I have only hedged out twice so far in my tracked betting career, and both times it was the right call and it paid off. So far when I have that little voice in my head telling me to hedge out, so far it's been right 100% of the time. So I might go ahead and listen to it again here. We shall see. But yeah, like it's just hard. It's hard to imagine Aspinall winning this fight if he doesn't find that finish early, and people rarely find that finish early against Volkov. So it's a tough call there. Anyway, that is it for all 12 fights on that card, folks. Let's go ahead and take a look at the bets that I've got. Like I said, it is largely parlays here. If we look up at the top there, I've got that 2 units on Aspinall at minus 110, maybe hedging out of that one. I also put Aspinall in some of my parlays here, but we'll see. Then I've got Pimblett, Topuria, Mokaev, got combined for plus 102, put half a unit on that. My big parlay here is Aspinall, Pimblett, Pavlovich, Krylov, Topuria, Mokaev, plus 714. Got half a unit on that. Then we've got Aspinall and Pavlovich, plus 157. As you can see, when I put all these together, I was very confident in Aspinall winning. That was before I had, thought through all of the different ways this fight could play out. So I threw Aspinall in a bunch of parlays. Then we've got Pimblett, Pavlovich, Topuria at plus 112 for 1 unit. Then we've got Grundy and Pavlovich at plus 105 for 1 unit. And then down here, I played Nelson by sub in round 1 and Nelson by sub in round 2 because I think that that's how that fight is. I think Nelson's likely to win by sub, and I think it's unlikely to happen in round 3. So rather than just playing his sub prop, I decided to go. And I went pretty heavy on those. Usually I just sprinkle those. I think Nelson by sub is a very, very likely way that this fight plays out. So I actually went 1 unit deep on each of those. But yeah, very weird card for me. If you followed my bets, I don't usually do this much parlaying. I mean, I often do 2 fight parlays, but I don't usually have a bunch of big, crazy parlays like this. But with the way that the numbers are on this card, it just kind of seemed like the way to go. So we'll see. I don't know. I'm going to consider this week a little bit of an experiment as far as how I approach my MMA gambling. It may be a successful experiment and it may not, but either way, we're going to learn from this moving forward whether this is something we want to do anymore or not. But keep an eye on my Twitter. I'll probably let you know if I make any crazy changes here, or if I end up hedging out of that Aspinall one or whatever. But there's a good chance that I am still gonna do a little bit more on this card. I'm gonna spend some time. So what I do after I do my tape study and I get my notes typed up, I go back through my notes and I kind of retype them in a way that sort of makes more sense to me. And then in doing that, I also look at the stats and I incorporate some of the stats a little more into my notes, and I kind of think through things from some different ways. So that's kind of my final step in the research. After I've done my tape, got my notes, I sort of go back through my notes, look at the stats, and sort of make some final decisions on whether I want to pull the trigger on some spots that way. So anyway, my throat is starting to hurt already. Like I said, I was sick. I had a rough week, but I'm glad we were able to find the time to get this video out anyway. I really, really appreciate those of you who do enjoy my content and do check out my videos. Please make sure you follow me on Twitter at erikbetsfights. Please make sure you like this video, and if you haven't yet subscribed, please do that. Please feel free to share my content around. I'd love to get more viewers, get more subscribers going here. I really enjoy doing this, and the idea that anyone really gives a shit at all and is actually watching these videos is really fun and flattering and exciting for me. So thanks to those of you who are. As always, folks, I am Erik with Erik Bets Fights, reminding you to play it smart, play it tight, and let's grow those bankrolls. Thanks for being here, folks. Have a good one and have fun with the fights tomorrow.